We have a wonderful ministry of young adults, and but everybody's welcome. If you want to hear more about that, please let me know. I do want to introduce now our speaker, Dr. Rob Hartzler. He's an orthopedic surgeon. Count him as a friend, and I've seen him not so much being a doctor, but being a father and a husband, and he blesses me. We did a mission trip last year together, and I have to say, being able to see him caring for the patients we saw was a real blessing to me, even as a pastor. So this is Dr. Rob Hartzler.
So while Scott works on that, this is the third time that I've been here and able to give this talk. And so it's getting more fun each time because I don't have to struggle so much to find the place or be nervous about standing up in front of you guys. So so the first time that I talked, you know, Victor told me, well, or maybe it was Scott, I can't remember. Well, just give your testimony, you know, and that's kind of complicated. Well, if you're the kind of person who makes things complicated, it's complicated. So, so I sort of did that the first time, and then the second time I definitely did. So now what I'm doing is just sort of talking about what I'm thinking about, you know, in life and in my Christian walk. Which I hope is okay. Victor didn't even remember that I'd done this before, so I guess it must be okay. So I sort of struggled to put a title on this thing because I'm going to talk about suffering today, and I thought that it was kind of cute, and so I typed in the suffering surgeon because it sounds like the suffering servant, and then it didn't really like sit that great with me, so I didn't even send that to Scott. I just said, call it Thoughts on Suffering. And this morning I was thinking about what I was going to say, and I thought, you know, it's not the greatest title because it sounds like, you know, you have a God complex. It's like the suffering surgeon, the suffering servant. Like that's exactly what you would expect from a surgeon. You know, like, you know. So I don't want you guys to think about that. It's just that that's what I've been thinking about a lot this year. So I do want you to invite, if anybody's new in town or if you're looking for a church, I love our church and I think that it's a great church. And so we do invite you to come down. So a little bit about me. So I'm an orthopedic surgeon here in town. I'm in private practice. The San Antonio Orthopedic Group is our group name. And I'm married and I've got a great family. That picture down at the bottom, I started playing in a band with my best friend, who's actually came today, which is really cool. So I have a lot of just awesome things going on in life, and it's a great time. And I do mostly shoulder and elbow surgery in my practice, so that's what those pictures are about. That's what life is like for me in the work life a lot. So I also don't want you to think that it's all pain and suffering. There's lots to be grateful for. So one thing that happened in 2017 that made me start thinking about suffering a lot was, you know, our group made me get this insurance policy, and so they sent this nurse out to like draw some blood and stuff like that, and you know, they weighed me for this life insurance thing, and I had like gained a lot of weight, which was kind of weird. And once you're out in the medical world, especially those of you who are going to be doctors, there's like free food everywhere. It's like, you know, you show up to these hospitals and they try to get you to come there by having this awesome food, so there's hot food all the time. So if you don't think about it, you can kind of, you know, gain a lot of weight without thinking about it. So, you know, I wasn't like morbidly obese or anything, but I was a lot heavier than I ever was. So it kind of scared me, and I thought, well, you know, let's try to lose some weight. So I really sort of went off the deep end and was really kind of starving myself almost. And so if you starve yourself for a few months, you really suffer a lot. It's like my first assistant that I work with, she was telling me all the time, you need to eat, you're like hangry, you know, all the time. It's such a great word. I mean, it's really like that, you know. So that was one thing. And then another thing was that I accidentally got onto this guy named Jordan Peterson, who's a really interesting person who's sort of become a little bit YouTube famous in the last year, but he's this psychologist in Canada, and you can listen to his lectures online on YouTube, and they're really interesting. A lot of it's personality topics, but it gets into a lot of philosophy and things like that. And I'm going to play. That's one of our technical difficulties. Is I was going to play some YouTube clips from Jordan Peterson. Yeah. So I guess we'll.
It's an existentialist claim, or maybe it's the existentialist claim, that the conditions of human life are such that suffering is an integral part of existence. Now, it's an important thing to understand. It's also a viewpoint shared by the bulk of the great religious systems of the world. Life is suffering. Why? In the number of decades that you can count on two hands. And that has nothing to do, technically, with the tyranny of the social structure. Now, you could say, if we got our act together more completely, perhaps you could live longer, and fair enough. But the fact of the limits of your lifespan and the suffering that's necessarily a consequence of that, the death of your parents and the death of most people that you will know before you, means that that part of suffering is an integral part of existence itself. And so that can't be laid at the feet of an insufficient social structure, except insofar as it's tyrannical and blind. It's a condition of existence. And then by the same token, you have your own responsibility for some of your unnecessary suffering, because there's things you could be doing to make your life better and to make life better for other people that you know perfectly well that you're not doing.
So this is a picture of my son, my oldest son, and he's a few years older now, but you know, so sorry, I almost can't go in. So it's funny. This is his first day of kindergarten, and you know, he said, "I want to be a doctor like Daddy," which is how many people's parents are doctors, or you know, or, yeah. So not that many. That's kind of interesting. So something interesting happened this year with my son. We were cleaning gutters, and it's pretty gross when you clean gutters. You know, it smells bad. It's really gross. So we were standing on this ladder together, and I thought I was going to teach him a lesson. You know, I told him like, you've got to work hard in school and do well and things like that, so you don't have to do a job like this. You know, and he said, kids are so funny. He said, well, I wouldn't want to do your job. Which really, you know, that made a big impression on me. So not all doctors deal with pain a lot, but I do. People always are coming to see orthopedic surgeons, almost always, because they're in pain and they're suffering. So, like I have some friends who are ophthalmologists, and sometimes people have eye pain or they have injuries or things, but mostly they go to the eye doctor because they can't see right. And so I don't know what all of y'all are going to be when you grow up, but you might not necessarily deal with pain and suffering in your job, but I do a lot. So this is one of my patients that I just did surgery on, and it's really horrible when people come in with these broken bones. You know, they're like, you can't live like that. I mean, it'll get better eventually, but you know, it hurts. And so I do stuff like this to people, and you know, it really helps them. But it's hard too. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot this year is that I sort of like enter into suffering with my patients, and that's helped me a lot to think of it that way, of entering into their suffering with them. So there's going to be gross pictures, so just a couple. But, so this is this guy's surgery. So you know, it's a big incision, and that top picture is a picture of the radial nerve, a bunch of radial nerve branches, and some blood vessels that go along with it, and then on the other side is the ulnar nerve, so that's like your funny bone nerve when you hit your elbow. So, and the radial nerve, the top one, like, it does not like to be messed around with. So often if you go in and do this kind of surgery, patients will, even if the nerve doesn't get like cut or something, it has problems afterwards, and they'll have a wrist drop. So then you've created another, an even maybe potentially worse problem. So when you're doing these kind of surgeries, it's really nerve-wracking, and I think, and one thing that I thought this year was that, so now I'm in my 4th year of practice, so I do these surgeries all the time, and I really know what to do. It's not like I feel really nervous about them or whatever, because I don't know what to do. I know exactly what to do, and I know how they're going to turn out, and it hasn't really gotten any better, you know, and it's not going to get better. So what do you do about that? So I've been reading, like, if you listen to Jordan Peterson, and you'll like get turned on to these like really kind of cool thinkers and serious thinkers, but they're, you know, it's heavy stuff. And you probably need some heavy stuff to get through life. So a lot of these guys are existentialists. You know, he started talking about life is suffering. That's one of the hallmarks of existential thinking. So this is a cool quote from Dostoevsky. Man is a creature who can get used to anything, and I believe that is the very best way of defining him. So one response to suffering is to just say, well, you just have to get used to it. And you can. I mean, people can get used to anything. You know? I read a lot this year about the Russian Gulag and about concentration camps and things like that. It's like, you know, there's a lot of horrible things that have happened in the world, and people lived through that. You know, they got through it, and people can get used to living through big and small problems, and so maybe the response to suffering is, well, you just get used to it. So Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear with almost any how," which is interesting. So here's a picture of me when I was in your shoes. And so it's interesting when you're suffering through medical training. I think the suffering in medical training, my perspective about it was that, well, you know, it's like you're going to get through it, and it's going to be a lot better when you get done. And so you just kind of put your head down to the grindstone, you know, and you get through it. But the reality is that it actually doesn't get better. You know, it's just as bad as it was before. It's actually worse, you know. So you can't just put your head down and get through it. You know, you have to deal with it. And that's one thing that I've learned from my patients the last few years too, because almost all my patients are old. You know, the people who get orthopedic problems are at least middle-aged, except for injury. You know, there's athletic injuries, but most of the people that come to see me in my practice are middle-aged, but a lot of them are old people, and like a lot of them are really old. And when you get really old, you're like falling apart. I mean, it's unbelievable, you know. So it really does keep getting worse, and at least from that perspective. And so, yeah, so sometimes I have to tell people like that you can't just have surgery for every problem that you have. You're just going to keep having more and more problems. And sometimes a lot of people come in to see me, and they're like really distressed. They're really distressed about a minor problem, and I've started to realize that part of the reason why that is because they've like gotten to this point in life where sort of everything else they've kind of figured out, like their job's good and their family's good, and they've like mostly raised their kids, and they're like ready to sort of like live the good life, so to speak. And then their bodies start falling apart, you know. They like just when they've got like everything else figured out, it's like this thing hurts, you know, and like, then everything's gonna start falling apart. And so, life is suffering. So Viktor Frankl, this is a real short book. You can read this pretty fast. Viktor Frankl was interesting because he was this psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz. So he has a really interesting perspective on suffering. So it is here that we encounter this central theme of existentialism. To live is to suffer, to survive is to find meaning in the suffering. And in the introduction, I can't remember who wrote the introduction, but they said, Frankl's perspective was, when everything else is taken away from you, what remains is the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude in a given set of circumstances. So no matter how bad it gets, that's the last human freedom, is to choose your response to the suffering. So that's another existentialist perspective, which I think it's really interesting. So
a couple of figures who are at the mythological roots of our culture. And, you know, people get upset with me because I bring in religious themes, but I understand some things about mythology and religion. It's not an accident that the axiomatic Western individual is someone who was unfairly nailed to a cross and tortured. It's like, yes, right, exactly. So what do you do about that? Well, I thought about that for a long time.
Language warning. Do we have any children here? Every year, there's one swear word here.
Well, you don't get together in the damn bog, because all that does is allow you to be as horrible as you could possibly imagine and suffer from none of the consequences. That's a bad idea. So how about we don't do that? Well, there's a deep idea in the West, too. It's like, pick up your damn suffering and bear it. And try to be a good person so you don't make it worse. Well, that's a truth. You know, I read a lot about the terrible things that people have done to each other. You just can't even imagine it. It's so awful. So you don't want to be someone like that. You know, do you have a reason to be? Yes. You have lots of reasons to be. God, there's reasons to be resentful about your existence. Everyone you know is going to die. You know, you too. And there's going to be a fair bit of pain along the way, and lots of it's going to be unfair. It's like, yeah, no wonder you're resentful. It's like, act it out and see what happens. You make everything you're complaining about infinitely worse. There's this idea that hell is a bottomless pit, and that's because no matter how bad it is, some stupid son of a bitch like you could figure out a way to make it a lot worse. So you think, well, what do you do about that? Well, you accept it. That's what life is like. It's suffering. That's what the religious people have always said. Life is suffering. Yes.
So Isaiah 53. So Jesus is the suffering servant. So maybe we'll just leave it at that. Read Isaiah 53. That's your homework assignment. So one interesting thing about Isaiah 53, you know, is that it says that Jesus was silent, you know, that he was like a lamb before the slaughter. So it's so funny, Jordan Peterson, you know, he says you can find a way to make it worse, you know, and one way that we find to make it worse is by complaining, like a lot, right? And I actually love complaining, you know. I do that a lot in the operating room when we're like really suffering, and I'm suffering, and I make everybody suffer too. So that's one thing that I'm trying to work on. Let's don't complain about it. All right, so Hebrews 5:8. he learned obedience from what he suffered, and once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. There's this interesting idea in Hebrews, you know, that like Christ was made perfect through the obedience of and suffering, and I don't really understand that idea totally. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it a little bit, but there's something in that for us too. So I think maybe, so one thing that I'm trying to get my head around is that, you know, when I got into the business that I'm in, that there's more suffering, not all suffering obviously, but more suffering than I thought, and that's good, I think. That's good that there is more, because there's opportunity in suffering. So here's another, Scott told me I had to end right at 50. So there's this idea, where is this one? I didn't put the verse in. As we share abundantly in Christ's sufferings, so through Christ we share abundantly in comfort too. And one more, let all those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls, this is from 1 Peter, entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good. So what I've been thinking about is listening more to my patients. It's painful to listen to patients sometimes, and if you really listen to them, that's a good thing. That helps them. Speak truth to them too. That can be a suffering process for everyone, but. And then the last thing is, don't avoid difficult problems. So one thing that I've observed, and I'm very tempted to go this way now, I know why people do it, but the further you get along in practice, you can arrange your life so that you have less suffering and less problems with your patients. Like, you can not do workers' comp, legal claims, patients that are really sick, challenging things, even though you probably can, and so don't arrange your life to avoid difficult problems and suffering.